We always hear about the incredible power of dynastic wealth, but what happens when that power goes dark? That's what we're digging into today, that shocking place where generational fortunes meet serious, sometimes deadly crime. So let's get right into it.
It's the big question, right? Are the super rich really above the law? To try and get to the bottom of that, we're going to look at 3 really well-known American dynasties. And what you'll see is that each case shows us a totally different kind of harm and, well, a very different kind of justice. Okay, so first things first, let's be super clear about who we're talking about here. This isn't about, say, the mafia or some organized crime family that was built on illegal stuff from the get-go. No. We're focusing on legitimate business dynasties. We're talking about families who built huge fortunes through legal industries, but somewhere along the line, their stories took a really disturbing turn. All right, let's dive into our first category. And honestly, this one is probably the most shocking. We're talking about direct, personal, brutal violence. It's definitely an outlier case, but man, it is a chilling one. So the person at the center of this is a guy named Robert Durst. Now, he wasn't just rich, he was the heir to a massive, multi-billion-dollar New York real estate empire. I mean, this guy had every single advantage you could possibly imagine in life, which makes what happened next all the more, well, jarring. Just look at this timeline. It shows this decades-long shadow of violence hanging over him. It all starts way back in 1982 when his wife Kathleen just disappears. Then, jump forward to 2000, his close friend Susan Berman is murdered execution style. A year after that, his neighbor is not only killed but dismembered. And get this, it took until 2021, almost 40 years after that first incident, for a murder conviction to actually stick. And the whole time, what's the backdrop? A multi-billion-dollar fortune. That unbelievable amount of money meant he could afford the absolute best lawyers and basically evade justice for decades. It's a textbook example of how money can be used to hide the most horrific, violent crimes. Okay, so for our next category, we're going to shift gears. We're moving away from that kind of premeditated, direct violence to something else entirely: fatal negligence. But this isn't just any negligence. It's the kind that gets shielded by a powerful family name and huge political influence. And here, we're talking about the Kennedy family. I mean, they're a true American dynasty, right? The name is synonymous with political power and just massive wealth. And their story has one particular incident that perfectly and tragically captures this type of harm.
The contrast here is just, wow. It's so stark. On one hand, you have this absolutely tragic incident. A car goes off a bridge, and a young woman, Mary Jo Kopechne, dies. On the other hand, what was the legal outcome for the driver, Senator Ted Kennedy? A 2-month suspended sentence for leaving the scene of an accident. You can see why for so many people this looked like a classic case of power and influence watering down the consequences of a fatal mistake. Now, for our third and final category, we have to zoom way out. The scope here gets way, way bigger. We're no longer talking about a single act of violence or one night of negligence. We're talking about corporate-level decisions that led to a full-blown public health crisis and an absolutely staggering human cost. And this brings us to the Sackler family. They were the owners of Purdue Pharma, and today, their family name is basically inseparable from their company's most famous product, the powerful opioid painkiller, OxyContin. So you have to ask, how did this all happen? Well, it wasn't an accident. It was a deliberate corporate strategy. Purdue Pharma went on an all-out marketing blitz for OxyContin. They downplayed the risks of addiction to doctors, they pushed it for all sorts of pain, not just severe cases, and they gave huge incentives to their sales reps. All while, misleading both doctors and the public about how safe the drug really was. And the result of that strategy? A nationwide opioid epidemic. The human toll is it's almost impossible to wrap your head around. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of overdose deaths linked to this crisis. A crisis that OxyContin was instrumental in creating. So what was the outcome for the company and the family? Billions. Billions of dollars in civil settlements. But here's the crucial part. 0 jail time for any member of the Sackler family. And this really highlights a whole different kind of harm. One that's massive, widespread, and lethal. Yet the accountability for it ends up being purely financial, not criminal. Okay, so we've looked at 3 very different dynasties and 3 totally distinct types of harm. So now, let's pull it all together and see what this full spectrum really looks like when you put it side by side. This table really lays it all out, doesn't it? You've got the Durst case on one end, direct, premeditated violence, which eventually led to a life sentence. Then you have the Kennedy case in the middle. Fatal negligence, shielded by influence, and the result was just a suspended sentence. And finally, the Sackler case. Corporate decisions causing harm on a massive scale, and the consequence? Huge civil payouts, but no one goes to prison. I mean, the kind of harm and the kind of justice served in each case, they're just worlds apart.
And this really gets us to the main takeaway. These horrifying cases of direct violence, like with Robert Durst, they are, thankfully, pretty rare. They're the outliers. But what all three of these stories show us is that there are so many different ways that immense wealth can insulate people from the consequences of the harm they cause, whether that harm is direct or negligent or corporate. And that's, well, it's deeply troubling.
Which really leaves us with one final and I think critical question to think about. When the harm done isn't to one person, but to hundreds of thousands of people, what does real justice even look like? Can billions of dollars in a settlement ever truly make up for that kind of human cost? It's a question that really challenges how we think about accountability, wealth, and power.